Tim in the World of Silence and Peace. A mysterious journey to another realm. Tim stood at the bus stop, waiting for the transport that would take him home. The day had been long, and his thoughts were consumed by all the unresolved worries and responsibilities. He looked around, noticing the familiar details. The noise of the streets, the hustle of people, all the elements that made up his daily life. He felt like a part of a mechanism carrying him through each morning and evening. He walked through life without noticing that everything around him and within him was changing, that the world in which he existed had long ceased to be the one it once was. Everything seemed monotonous, and no matter how busy he was, deep down, he knew he had stopped feeling joy in what he did. The bus pulled up, and Tim stepped inside without giving it much thought. He moved as always, on autopilot, focused only on getting home. He sat in his usual seat by the window and watched the city blur past, trying to lose himself in the sounds of the streets and the wheels. The city lights flickered outside the windows when, suddenly, something caught his attention. It was a man standing near the bus door. His clothing was odd. A long coat unsuited for the season and a hat that almost concealed his face. The man looked like a character from another time, as though he didn't belong to the hustle and noise. He stood motionless, his gaze fixed directly on Tim. At first, Tim ignored him, assuming it was a coincidence. But when he glanced at the man again, he was still staring at him, his eyes filled with something strange. Tim felt a slight unease. His eyes met the man's, and at that moment, the stranger took a step forward, as if expecting Tim to say something. The man's silhouette seemed untouched by time, his clothing untainted by life, as if he were from another world. "Tim," the man said. His voice was strange but clear, spoken with such certainty that Tim couldn't help but be surprised. He hesitated, then replied, "Yes, that's me. But how do you?" He trailed off, unsure of what else to say. But the man continued. "Are you ready?" the man asked, and there was something in his voice that made Tim's heart race. It was unclear what exactly the man wanted from him, but something within Tim stirred. Almost instinctively, Tim understood that answering this question was important. Without knowing why, his response came, unexpectedly direct and honest. "I'm ready, but for what?" Before he could say more, the man turned silently and stepped toward the doors, which opened with a soft click. His figure disappeared into the darkness, and as Tim rose to follow, everything changed. As if by magic, the bus stopped moving. The noise, the hustle, and the sounds of the city vanished. He looked around, trying to understand what was happening. Instead of being at his usual stop, he found himself in an entirely different place. Tim stood on a path surrounded by tall trees. The ground beneath his feet was soft and covered in grass, and the air was filled with the faint fragrance of flowers. Everything around him was astonishingly quiet. The place where he found himself was utterly different, unlike anything he had ever seen. There was a sense of weightlessness, as if time and space had softened, and the world was divided into indistinct, unreal layers. Tim felt his body begin to relax. He didn't know how he had ended up here, but he didn't want to return to the reality where he was so busy, consumed by worries and stress. Here, it was peaceful and serene. He took a few steps and looked around, noticing how the light filtered through the tree branches. Gentle rays fell on his face, warming him and filling him with a strange calm. He couldn't explain why this place felt so inviting, but the longer he stayed, the more familiar it became. Suddenly, his eyes were drawn to a small path that led deeper into the garden. It was covered in moss, and along its edges grew unusual plants that seemed to glow from within. They weren't like ordinary flowers. Their petals emitted a soft light, creating an atmosphere of mystery and magic. Tim slowly walked along the path. Everything around him filled him with a strange sense of peace that was unfamiliar to him. It felt as though he was being transported to another world, not physically, but on a deeper level. He didn't know what lay ahead, but it seemed that everything around him indicated he wasn't here by chance. His steps grew more confident, and the air around him felt increasingly vibrant. This wasn't just a walk in the garden. It was a journey within himself. Tim continued down the path, each step feeling like part of something more significant than a simple stroll. Time in this place seemed to have no clear boundaries. The light around him wasn't tied to hours or days, but remained constant and soothing, like an eternal afternoon. Everything around him was quiet and calm, with not a single movement or sound disturbing the harmony. The flowers along the path grew increasingly peculiar as he moved forward. Some were vibrant shades of purple and blue, while others appeared almost translucent, as though made of glass. All of them emitted a soft glow that illuminated even the ground he walked on. Suddenly, amidst these enigmatic plants, he noticed something extraordinary. At the center of the garden stood a large tree with long, almost silver branches cascading downward like a delicate veil covering the ground. On its branches hung strange fruits. They resembled golden apples, but their light was unusual, as if they radiated warmth that filled the air. Tim couldn't take his eyes off the tree. It seemed to be the heart of this magical place. He approached, feeling his breath deepen and his heartbeat calm. He didn't know what exactly drew him in, the light of the fruits or something deeper hidden in this place. He was ready to touch one of the fruits when his hand froze in midair. Something had changed. A faint rustling sound arose in the air, as though someone were whispering his name. Tim looked around but saw no one. Suddenly, it felt as though the ground beneath him trembled slightly, and the light in the garden began to dim. The branches of the tree started to move, and a gentle wave passed through them, causing the fruits to sway lightly. He sensed something unseen watching him. It wasn't frightening, but rather astonishing. He couldn't understand why he felt so small and vulnerable in this place, despite its calm. At the same time, there was a strange calling, as if the garden wanted to convey something to him, a secret or a key to a mystery, but everything remained hidden. "You didn't come here by accident," a voice suddenly said. It was quiet yet distinct, as if it emerged directly in his mind. Tim turned but saw no one. It was impossible to explain. The voice wasn't loud. It was more like a tone of realization, as though someone was uncovering the secret of this place and he had become part of the revelation. "Who are you?" Tim asked, his voice trembling slightly from the unexpectedness, yet still resolute. He was ready to seek answers, even if they were concealed within these strange voices and images he couldn't explain. The silence that followed was louder than any response. But then the light around him changed once again. The fruits on the tree began to glow even brighter, and the entire atmosphere filled with the sense that he was on the verge of something important. "This is not just a garden," the voice continued in his mind. "This is a place where the boundaries between worlds intersect. You are here to find what was lost." Tim felt his heart race, his hands trembling slightly. He didn't know what it meant. Nothing like this had ever happened in his life. But his intuition told him that this garden wasn't just a place. It was something far deeper and more meaningful. He became more attuned to his surroundings, his eyes searching for signs of something new. Suddenly, from one of the tree's branches, something fell and rolled to his feet. It was a strange object, a small silver locket that glimmered as Tim picked it up. Carefully, he opened the locket to find a miniature map inside. Several points were marked on it, one of which glowed brightly. Tim felt clarity wash over him, and his intuition told him this map was the key to understanding why he was here and what he needed to do. "Follow the light," the voice said again. "It will lead you to where your path begins." Tim carefully placed the locket in his pocket and began walking toward the glowing point on the map. With every step, the sense of wonder grew stronger, and he knew his life would never be the same again. He wasn't here by chance. Each step he took in this garden was part of a greater story that was just beginning. At the center of the hall stood a table, upon which lay an ancient book. The book was open, and its pages turned on their own, as though an invisible hand moved through them. Tim felt irresistibly drawn to the book. His hands reached out toward it. Carefully, he approached and picked it up. As soon as he touched the book, his eyes were filled with a bright light, and a vision appeared before him. A depiction of an ancient city, mysterious creatures, and a vast forest that seemed as alive as the plants surrounding him. The voice that had spoken earlier in his mind now clearly pronounced, "You have become part of this world. But remember, you must choose where to go." Tim felt his heart race. He realized the book was a key to unlocking mysteries, but it was only one part of a much larger journey. He understood that he was at the center of something extraordinary, and that this world was not just a garden or a tower, but an entire realm filled with secrets and stories waiting to be uncovered. Tim looked at the map, and now a new point appeared on it. This one was not in the garden, but in the very heart of the city he had seen in the book's pages. "A journey lies ahead of you," the voice continued in his mind. "The guiding star does more than point the way. It opens new doors. But remember, every step you take will have consequences." Tim placed the book back on the table. There was much more to learn. Glancing at the map and the light that still glowed in his hands, he felt ready for the next stage of his journey. Tim walked along the ancient path leading to the place marked on the map, the city depicted in the book. This city seemed to have a life of its own, unlike any he had ever seen. Time here did not flow as it did in the world he knew. It felt slowed, as if the world itself lingered in eternal shadow or perpetual dawn. There were no people on the streets, but the buildings, adorned with intricate patterns and carvings, seemed alive. The walls, covered with vines, looked like living beings, and occasionally, one would softly sway as though breathing. The light falling from the sky was soft and golden, and the air was filled with a strange scent that Tim couldn't place. It was the fragrance of something ancient yet fresh, as though this city was a confluence of multiple worlds. He continued walking, feeling his steps grow lighter while his body seemed to absorb the atmosphere of this place. It felt as though he was merging with the city, and his thoughts became clearer. Suddenly, a building loomed before him, its facade adorned with magnificent mosaics that seemed to shift with every glance. The designs were so intricate that they resembled an ancient map or a riddle waiting to be solved. Tim approached, and the door before him opened silently, as if inviting him inside. He stepped in and immediately felt surrounded by a strange calmness that enveloped him entirely. Inside the building stood a table with several ancient scrolls and a book. It was the same book he had seen in the tower, but now it seemed to belong to this world, an inseparable part of this reality. A light swirled around the book, and new words appeared quickly on its pages. Each word glowed softly with a golden light, as if the book itself was alive and breathing. Tim carefully opened one of the pages and read, "Those who dare to enter this city must be ready. The city will not accept anyone who does not understand its secrets. But if you find the answers, you will gain a power beyond imagination. In this city, time exists, but it is not for everyone. Find the door to the past, and you will understand how to shape the future." Tim's heart raced. These words were not merely a prediction but a warning. The city would not reveal all its secrets at once. He would have to search for answers and solve the mysteries hidden in its past. But what exactly did the door to the past mean? And how was he to find it? Suddenly, he felt a faint tremor, and the books on the table began to turn their pages on their own. Each page seemed to bring something new, something vital. On one page, new writing appeared. "You are not alone on this journey. Those who stand behind you will meet you in the future. But your strength will only come when you understand your true purpose." Tim tried to decipher what this could mean. He turned his gaze to the map, now spread out on the table before him. New lines and symbols began to appear on the map. It was no longer just a map of the city, but of the entire path he was meant to travel. The map shifted as if responding to his questions. He noticed that one of the lines led to a high hill beyond the city. There was a point glowing brightly, capturing his attention. He knew this place was significant, that he had to go there to understand the meaning of all these words and signs. Taking one last look at the map and the book, he placed the book in his bag and headed for the exit. The air outside was fresh, and despite the strange atmosphere of this world, he felt calmer here than he ever had before. Time no longer mattered, and he was ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. Tim reached the base of the hill. The wind, once barely perceptible, now grew quieter, as though the world itself slowed its rhythm. He felt the space around him shifting, as if the hill were a threshold to something greater. Everything before this moment seemed like preparation for something more significant. Looking up, Tim saw the hill crowned with an ancient tree. Its bark was dark and deeply furrowed, like the face of an old sage. The tree's branches stretched toward the sky, sprawling in all directions. Despite its grandeur, the tree exuded a strange calmness, as if it had observed this world for 1,000 years. Tim knew this tree was the key, the destination he had been meant to reach. Though he couldn't explain why, he felt it deeply. His steps now felt different. He climbed as though guided by an unseen force pulling him forward, following the path leading to the tree. As he reached its roots, the ground beneath his feet felt soft and warm, as if nature itself welcomed him. He stopped before the tree, examining its mighty roots and searching for something unusual. His gaze fell upon a stone lying at the base of the tree. It was covered with ancient runes that seemed to hold meaning far beyond decoration. These runes were part of an ancient language, long forgotten by this world. Tim leaned down carefully to study the stone. As his fingers brushed its surface, he felt a faint vibration emanating from it. At that moment, the ground beneath him trembled, and the tree's roots began to move slowly, as if coming to life. "Are you ready?" The voice pierced his mind once more. It was the same voice that had guided him throughout his journey, but now it was deeper, as though it came from the earth itself. Tim couldn't respond, but his heart raced. He knew that his actions in this moment would determine what came next. Before him, deep within the tree's roots, a small hollow opened. In the shadows lay a small box made of the same wood as the tree. It was a strange, almost magical artifact. He carefully took it in his hands, and as its lid opened, a glowing crystal fell out, emitting a faint but bright light. "This crystal is your key. It will guide you through the gates," the voice said. "But remember, the gates are not simple. They will only open when you understand their purpose." Tim felt his mind flood with new knowledge, though it was hazy and incomplete. He couldn't immediately grasp what gates the voice referred to, but he knew one thing: the crystal was crucial. He stood, carefully placing the crystal in his bag, and looked once more at the tree. Its branches seemed to reach for the sky, pointing to something unseen, waiting for him. The hill was filled with mysteries, and he knew that despite obtaining the crystal, his journey had only just begun. The crystal in his backpack now seemed alive. It radiated such warmth that Tim often wondered if the glowing stone might spring to life in his hands. The crystal pulsed with energy, as though something, or someone, inside it was trying to communicate with him. Tim continued walking along the familiar streets. He knew he needed to find the gates mentioned by the voice, but they remained a mystery to him. Suddenly, his gaze fell upon an old archway that he had previously thought was just part of the city's architecture. But now, it looked different. Something about it had changed. It glowed with a soft light that matched the light of his crystal. Tim approached the archway, and as he drew nearer, he felt an unusual energy filling his body. He realized that this was the place, the very gate spoken of in the book and by the voice. Standing before them, he felt the weight of the moment. He could step through, but what awaited him on the other side? He didn't know. Yet, his intuition told him that this step was necessary. Carefully, he took the crystal out of his backpack and gazed at it, feeling its energy flow into his hand. The crystal began to glow brighter, as if the world itself was anticipating his action. His hands trembled with anticipation, but he knew there was no turning back now. He lifted the crystal and held it toward the archway. The stone's light merged with the arch's radiance, and in that instant, as though the arch had acknowledged him, it began to open slowly. A stream of light so bright that Tim could barely see poured through. But he felt it. Beyond the gates lay something ancient and profound. When the gates fully opened, Tim stepped through. Tim found himself in another world. This place was a strange blend of forest and city, yet unlike anything he had ever known. There were no people or animals here. A light mist covered the ground, drifting gently through the air. The trees were extraordinarily tall, and their leaves were nearly transparent, as if made of glass. Looking around, Tim realized this place could not be part of the world he had entered before. Here, time and space seemed to blend together, as though he stood at a crossroads where everything intertwined. He understood that he had arrived in the past. But it wasn't just any past. It was a realm where the past and future coexisted, where everything was interconnected. Here, amidst this strange forest, Tim knew he would find answers. But how? He listened to his inner voice once more and felt his steps being guided toward the heart of this place. He didn't know exactly what he was searching for, but he knew he had to follow this path. The place seemed to call to him. It was part of his journey. As he moved forward, he paid attention to every detail. Strange objects appeared along the way. Stones that glowed faintly in the dark, ancient altars covered with mysterious inscriptions. Everything felt like pieces of a giant puzzle he needed to solve. In the distance, he saw a strange silhouette, a massive tower stretching into the clouds. Surrounding it was a network of bridges connecting it to other towers hidden in the mist. This wasn't just a structure. It was the focal point of power, the place where all threads of time and space converged. Tim knew this tower was what he needed to find. He quickened his pace, moving toward it. But the closer he got, the stronger the feeling that he was not alone in this world. Everything around him felt alive, as though invisible beings were watching his every move. As he neared the tower, Tim noticed strange stones scattered around its base, forming a circular pattern. He realized this place held significance. Standing at the center of the circle, he felt energy surging through his body. This was a place of power. Here, he knew, was where the next step of his journey would unfold. He braced himself, sensing that something was about to happen. The ground beneath Tim's feet trembled, and a faint sound filled the air, as though the tower itself was waking up. Its walls began to glow, and from its pinnacle, a beam of light shot skyward. Tim didn't know what it meant, but his intuition told him he couldn't stop now. He had to enter the tower and uncover its secrets. Swallowing his fear, he stepped forward. As he entered, the light grew brighter, and the tower's walls shifted, revealing new passageways. Tim understood that every step he took inside this place brought him closer to the answers he sought. He had to find the heart of the tower, the point where all its mysteries were concealed. Step by step, he delved deeper into its depths, feeling his strength concentrate as he moved. He was ready. The deeper Tim ventured into the tower, the darker it became and the colder the air grew. Yet, despite the strange sense of calm that enveloped him, the tower felt alive. The walls murmured faintly, not with sounds that frightened him, but with something more profound, as if the tower itself was sharing ancient knowledge with him. Everything around him was imbued with an ancient magic, and despite its overwhelming power, it didn't inspire fear. Instead, it offered comfort and safety. Tim continued along narrow corridors, climbing ever higher on a staircase that seemed endless. Each step brought him closer to uncovering the secrets this ancient temple held. As he turned the final corner of the staircase, a room bathed in soft light opened before him. The space was surrounded by tall windows through which the light of the stars poured in, as if the sky itself had become part of this place. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which rested an ancient artifact glowing with a gentle silver light. It was a crystal, not like the one he had found in the forest, but made of the same material. Tim knew this crystal was significant. He could feel it. It was the key to unlocking the purpose of his journey. Approaching cautiously, he reached out to take the crystal. As his fingers brushed it, the light in the room dimmed briefly before growing brighter again. A wave of energy rippled through his body, not unsettling but flowing like a current, connecting him to something far greater than this world. In that moment, Tim understood that this crystal was more than a symbol. It was a true conduit between worlds. It was the key to the next phase of his journey, the gateway to deeper understanding. Carefully, he took the crystal into his hand, and the entire room began to transform. The walls started to glow, then gradually dissolved into light. Instantly, a new world unfolded around him, a bright yet gentle realm, like a luminous dream. Small, glowing beings resembling fireflies fluttered around him, leaving trails of light in their wake. Tim looked around, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. There was no fear or anxiety here. This was a place where time and space no longer existed, only infinite harmony, as if the universe itself had opened its gates to him. Tim felt he had finally arrived home. He glanced at the crystal in his hand. This wasn't the end of his journey. It was the beginning of a new reality he was destined to explore. As he stepped forward, the air around him filled with clarity, and his inner voice spoke once more, its words now unmistakably clear. You are here for a reason. You have always been part of this world. You just needed to open your eyes. Tim moved steadily toward a central source of light. At the core of this new realm stood a massive stone, its surface smooth and shining, yet alive as though the very fabric of existence pulsed within it. When Tim touched the stone, the space around him began to shift. The transformation was subtle at first, but soon the world reshaped itself entirely, as if each particle of air and light was taking on a new form. In this moment, Tim realized that he was no longer just an observer. He was a part of this world, and this world was a part of him. As Tim moved further, a new scene unfolded before him, as if reality itself was parting to let him step into a new dimension. In the distance, he saw something strange, a glowing portal through which streams of energy flowed, intertwining as if time itself was weaving its strands together. It was deeper and more profound than he could initially comprehend, and he realized that this portal was the place where all possible timelines converged, where the boundaries between past and future dissolved. Tim approached the portal and felt his body fill with an even greater energy. He knew this moment was pivotal, and he was ready. He had to step into this portal to uncover what lay beyond the known realm. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. As soon as he crossed the threshold, the world around him began to blur, and he felt his consciousness merge with this new time. It was unlike anything he had experienced before. Time no longer existed, and space became vast and infinite. Everything in this realm was interconnected, and he knew that now he was part of this flow. Time around him began to slow, and his every movement became more deliberate and mindful. He was connected to this world and felt his thoughts grow clearer and sharper. He realized that he was no longer merely traveling through this place. He had become part of it. He was at the very heart of time, where past, present, and future wove together into a single living fabric. Tim felt his consciousness expanding, and he became aware that he could now perceive everything happening around him. He could see how the different streams of time intersected, influencing one another. It was like watching all the moments of life that had ever been, that were now, and that would come to be. He understood that this was where he was meant to learn the truth about himself and his journey. He continued to move forward, as though time itself was guiding him to the next milestone in his journey. Tim walked ahead, feeling the space around him shift with every step he took. He no longer felt constrained by external forces or temporal boundaries. Everything here was infinite and unbroken. Each breath brought peace, and each step brought him closer to understanding that he was part of something far greater. The air around him grew lighter. He felt as though each breath he took filled him not just with air, but with the very essence of this world. He felt his existence becoming part of this infinite harmony. He didn't know what awaited him, but he knew that all these paths led to discovery and understanding. Suddenly, as if his thoughts had resonated with the space, thousands of tiny stars appeared in the sky. Each star glowed with its own unique light, creating a magical spectacle. They began to form patterns, gradually assembling into larger symbols that were familiar to him. These were guiding stars, pointing the way forward. He stopped, awestruck by how these stars seemed to know him. Their light was soft but powerful, and he felt his heart respond to their glow. Each star seemed to tell its own story, each shimmer a step along the path that had been destined for him. He followed the light, walking in the direction the stars pointed. With each step, the world grew clearer, and his senses deepened. He knew this path was not random, that each star was guiding him towards something vital he needed to understand. These lights were his guides, illuminating the dark forest where he had once felt lost. Now, by their light, he moved forward, confident and aware. The procession of stars continued, and Tim followed them as if they were leading him through a labyrinth of his own consciousness. He realized that this world was not just a space, but also a reflection of himself. The further he walked, the clearer the path became, and the easier it was to accept everything happening around him. He had learned to let go of fear and doubt, understanding that everything was part of a unified flow. At one point, a star appeared before him, much brighter than the others. It didn't merely glow. It radiated a soft energy as if its light was alive and tangible. Tim felt his heart fill with warmth as he gazed at it. This star seemed to be waiting for him. He stepped forward, and as his hand nearly touched it, the world around him began to change. The star started to dissolve, and its light poured into him, as if it was animating his body and soul. He felt it illuminate even the darkest corners of his consciousness. He saw before him an endless ocean, and each breath he took filled him with new understanding of this world. He realized this journey wasn't just physical, it was internal as well. The stars were a reminder that every step was not just movement through space, but a profound transformation happening within him. After the star's light faded into his hand, a new path opened before Tim. He found himself on the shore of a serene lake, its water so clear that every movement within its depths was visible, as if the entire world existed in perfect harmony. In the distance, across the lake, he saw a waterfall gently cascading down, creating an extraordinary sound. This sound was unique. It wasn't just the noise of water, it was a melody that softly permeated his consciousness, filling him with peace and contentment. He approached the lake, feeling that, although it reflected his thoughts, the waterfall held something deeply significant. Tim sat on a stone by the water, watching as light gently danced across its surface. The water seemed alive, not merely water, but a full-fledged being of this world. It pulsed as if breathing, and each ripple created soft waves that radiated across the surface, filling the surrounding space. Suddenly, he understood. The water symbolized his own journey. Just like the flow of water, he could move without resistance, not fighting the current, but allowing himself to drift and explore, discovering new horizons along the way. Tim closed his eyes and allowed himself to simply sit in this world, hearing only the sound of the waterfall and feeling his thoughts grow clearer. He was in harmony with this place, and this state wasn't just about being here, but about allowing himself to be fully open, free from fear or limitations. He stood up, his body light and his mind in a state of unprecedented clarity. Standing on the lake shore, which reflected light into countless tiny sparks, Tim looked into the water, trying to comprehend what this world was and how he had ended up here. Every movement of the water seemed to follow not just natural forces but some subtler mechanism, as if reality itself obeyed special laws. Tim stepped forward, feeling ready to discover more of the mysteries this extraordinary world held for him. The journey continued, and he was no longer just an observer. He was a part of it all. Each step he took deepened his connection to this place, preparing him for the answers that awaited. He felt his consciousness expand, as though he had become part of the world itself. He was no longer a separate person merely walking through this forest. He had become a part of it, woven into the very fabric of this space. In that moment, Tim realized that the world did not merely exist, it lived. Every element, every creature, every tree in this forest was interconnected. His presence here was no accident. Suddenly, the woman he had met by the lake appeared before him again. She stood in the very spot where the stone had been moments earlier, her face glowing with a gentle light. There was something profound and timeless in her gaze. "You understand now," she said with a smile. "You have become part of this world. You're not just an observer. You are an active participant helping this world live and grow." Tim stood there, unsure of how to respond. He felt his heart overflow with emotion, as though everything he had experienced up until this moment had been preparing him for what was now unfolding. He was no longer just a traveler. He was part of this life, part of this forest, this world. "But how?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. How can I be part of all this? The woman stepped closer and placed her hand on his shoulder. You can't see it, but you've already become a part of this world. You are like every leaf on the trees, like every stone on this path. Everything here is connected, and you are connected to it. All that you've experienced, all your questions and searching, they are part of your journey. You were ready, and now you're prepared to go further. Tim looked into her eyes and realized that his journey was just beginning. He understood that the answers wouldn't come as clear instructions. The answers lay in the journey itself, in following the path without asking too many questions. This was a path of acceptance and connection, a path he needed to walk. Now you can move forward, she said. Go on to the next stage of your journey. But remember, everything you do matters. You are part of this world, and your actions have significance. With those words, she vanished, leaving Tim alone with his thoughts. He felt his place in this world become clear. He was part of something greater, and his journey was not just about exploration but about becoming. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he felt he now had everything he needed to continue. Tim rose from the stone slab and looked at the forest, which now seemed not just a place but a living organism. Everything around him was connected, and he was part of this living world. He stepped forward, and each step felt meaningful. He wasn't alone. He was part of this world, and his purpose was to keep moving forward, following his path. Tim walked through the forest, his steps becoming more confident with each stride. The leaves beneath his feet rustled as though welcoming him, and the air filled with a quiet yet profound sound that seemed to come from the heart of nature itself. He realized his journey was approaching its conclusion, but each step remained important. Every moment, every detail in this world was now part of his experience, part of what he was living through. The forest grew quieter. The sounds of birds, the hum of insects, the rustle of the wind, all of it faded away, as if the world were holding its breath in anticipation of something significant. Tim continued forward until he saw a faint light in the distance. It was something unusual, unlike sunlight or the glow of a fire. This light emanated directly from the earth, as though the ground itself was shining. As Tim approached, an astonishing sight unfolded before him. Deep within the forest, surrounded by ancient trees, stood enormous gates. They towered above him, made of shimmering materials that refracted all the colors of the rainbow. These gates didn't belong to any ordinary world but were undeniably real, standing before him. Tim stopped, his heart racing. He understood that these weren't just gates. They were a passage, the beginning of a new phase in his journey. The gates, like everything else he had encountered in this world, were alive. They weren't just a creation or a material structure. They were part of a great cycle, part of this world, and they were waiting for him. He stepped closer to the gates and felt a gentle vibration ripple through his body. The gates seemed to invite him to pass through, but Tim paused for a moment, trying to grasp what lay ahead. This was